Hello everyone, Ember Power here and welcome back to a new video. So today I hope to start my coverage of Paldea Evolved deck lists, and we're actually going to start off with a pre-existing deck which I do believe gets a lot stronger in Paldea Evolved, and that is of course going to be Zoroark Toolbox. So Zoroark is this pretty infamous stage 1 in the TCG, of course has the amazing ability Phantom Transformation that allows it to turn into any stage 1 Pokemon that's in your discard pile, which is pretty cool. But unfortunately, you do have to discard all energy cards and, damage counters and stuff remain the same, I believe. But it's still a very cool ability and very strong and allows for some very creative decks. Unfortunately, the Zoroark has fallen on hard times due to the existence of Lost Zone and, just Pokemon having a lot more HP than usual. So it is pretty difficult for this deck to reach those damage outputs. But it does look like finally in Paldea Evolved, we are at least seeing some attackers that have an incredible amount of base damage, at least with some of the new special energy in Pokemon. So that is certainly worth bearing in mind. And this will definitely be interesting to see if Zoroark, can compete as a result. But, it's always going to be a bit of an uphill battle with, Lost Zone existing. So if we go into some of the new translations, we have Noivern EX very quickly. 260 HP EX Stage 1 Pokemon, so of course something that people sometimes forget is that Stage 1 EXs still count as Stage 1 Pokemon, so unlike V-Stars, you can actually use Zoroark to transform into a Stage 1 EX, which is pretty cool. It has 2 attacks, Covert Flight and Dominant Echo. Typically, you're never going to use Dominant Echo because we don't play the energy requirements, but we do play 2 colorless energy, so we play stuff like Double Turbo, so we can use this attack. And it does 70 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done to Noivern but from attacks by basic Pokemon. So effectively means you can have an answer to deal with stuff like Cramorant, as well as, other basic heavy decks. Maybe Regigigas comes back. But there's probably some better basic decks out there. Oh, like Miraidon, I guess. So there is better examples. Personally, I don't think Zoroark needs Noivern, especially not when you're only doing 70 damage or 50 if you use a double turbo. Just seems pretty bad, to be honest, and your opponent can obviously rope out of it potentially, but still pretty cool card and worth considering. We also have Reverse Energy that says as long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides colorless energy. However, if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, and if this card is attached to an evolution Pokemon that doesn't have a Roblox, so basically any single prize stage 1 Pokemon or stage 2, this card provides every type of energy but only 3 energy at a time. So it's essentially like triple Aurora or triple Rainbow energy, but on a single prize Pokemon if you're behind on prize cards. And that's really important because there is some pretty cool attackers like the Cetitan. Can anyone speak Spanish? But basically all you need to know about this Cetitan is that its main attack for 2 water and a colorless does 80 damage and 140 more if it has any special energy attached to it. So that's an awful lot of damage if it has reverse energy. So you have to be behind on prize cards, but of course this will allow you to swing for, I think that's 220 damage. So yeah, that's quite a lot. It's certainly quite a lot of damage. It's pretty respectable. You'll KO stuff like Miraidon. So yeah, definitely a potent single prize attacker. And honestly, something that Zoroark decks have really been lacking because often they've had to rely on Flapple and Raichu, which can often be played around. So having a Pokemon that can just do massive damage in a single hit is great for, dealing with these high HP Pokemon in the format. There's also a new supporter card that's in pretty much every deck at the moment in Japan. That is going to be Ono, or Iono. I don't know how to pronounce the name, honestly don't care. But either way, each player shovels their hand and puts on the bottom of their deck. If either player puts any cards on the bottom of their deck in this way, each player draws a card for each of his or her remaining prize cards. So it's essentially like Marnie meets N, and it's basically like the next great draw supporter to play alongside Research. So just going into the first list here, do apologize for the images being a bit blurry. Usually where I get these card lists from is changed, so fortunately it's not the same place. But the Zoroark deck is actually playing a 3-3 one line of Kirlia Gallade, so allows you to use the trade ability on Kirlia, so you can actually discard Pokemon, have decent synergy there, while also, drawing more cards. You're also playing the Flapple that does 50 damage for each Pokemon to play with an ability on your opponent's side, which is very strong. There's also the Acidic Mucus, or I like to call it Hot Cross Bun. It's not called Flapple. What's the other one called? Oh yeah, Appleton. The one that does 70 damage for each special energy attached to each of your opponent's Pokemon, which is pretty interesting to see because Usually the only Pokemon have special energy attached to them in this format are like Lugia and Mew, which is probably what that's in here for, truthfully, but still a decent card. There's also the Mightyena, which is your go-to Mew counter. There's also the Slowbro that will allow you to take two, I think it's take one prize cards, or take two, no, it's take two prize cards if your opponent is on one prize card remaining. So effectively, you want to let your opponent get ahead in the game, and then you can kind of sneak in there and win with Slowbro, which is cool. So also playing one Mismagius. So what you can effectively do with Mismagius is that if they KO it, you can place a damage counters on your opponent's active, but it also allows you to sprinkle 2 damage counters on each of your opponent's Pokemon, which is pretty nifty. You also have the Noivern. Now, interestingly enough, I did mention earlier most Zoroark decks won't bother with playing Psychic and Dark Energy. This deck does play 3 Psychic, 2 Basic Dark, so you can actually attack with Noivern if you really wanted to, and use both attacks. This deck is also playing cetitan, and it is playing 2 copies of Mimikyu. So the new Mimikyu, which I didn't translate earlier, basically this card is immune to all damage from V's and EX Pokemon. So decent walling option in certain matchups. And then as for the trainers, nothing too crazy. We do see the new item. Well, it's not new, but it's certainly the first card of it's been in a while, and that's going to be Super Rod. Shuffle 3 in any combination of basic energy and Pokemon back into your deck. There's also, we've got here Boss's Orders, Raihan. Zinir's Resolve is always interesting to me. I'm surprised Japan really likes this card. I don't think it's very good. 2 copies of Miriam, 4 copies of the Ono, 2 Path to the Peak. One, I believe that is Arzen Town. The one that allows you to, once in your turn, search your deck for basic Pokemon without Robux and put them onto your bench. 4 Reverse Energy, and then 5 Basic Energy. So yeah, pretty self-explanatory. Pretty safe deck, I would say. Just, unfortunately, your opponent will often have ways around Mimikyu, but aside from that, seems like a pretty strong deck. So then next up we have is like another kind of toolboxy deck. Still playing the 3-3-1 line of Corellia Gallade, but this deck is also playing some interesting stuff. Like we've got the Fortress, for example, which KOs itself and allows you to search your deck for up to 5 basic grass energies. Spoiler alert, we don't play any grass energy. So Fortress EX is only in here to KO itself, so you can go behind on prize cards and take advantage of reverse energy, which is interesting. You know, I always think that Zoroark is such a squishy deck anyway, you don't need to worry about this. But maybe, you know, there's this like rare situation that you get ahead on prize cards really quickly, and then you want your opponent to be winning the game at that point, and so you use Fortress. It does put you in range of being able to use the Slowbro, I suppose, which is cool. But yeah, Fortress, a bit risky, but could be cool. We also actually have the Mellometal, which is now an option thanks to Reverse Energy. The one that does 80 damage and then prevent all effects of attacks, including damage done to Pokemon, by Pokemon with an ability. So it will prevent damage done to you by stuff like Palkia, stuff like Arceus, stuff like Miraidon, so that's pretty big. There's also the new Electrive. Well, it's not new. I think it's came around in Brilliant Stars, but there's like a really cool artwork for it in Crown Zenith. Does 50 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon for a reversal energy, so that's pretty decent. And we even got the Drifloon in here. The one allows you to like spread 8 damage counters, I believe, for 3 psychics. That's kind of cool. There's like a little basket in here to help you set it with Pokemon. Manaphy for bench protection, and a Raichu that does 40 damage, but then I think it does 120 more if your opponent has used their V-Star power. So, honestly, a pretty cool deck. I'm not a huge fan of the Fortress in my testing. I'd just rather have more Titans, to be honest. But yeah, Fortress, a little bit shaky on that one, but other than that, pretty cool deck. So then we go on to the next deck, and we have still playing the Curler engine. I don't think Japan likes Piparo that much anymore, but you know, we got the Curlia. So it also allows you to play the Gardevoir, which is the exact same trade effect, discard 1, draw 2, but the offset of like Gardevoir over something like Curlia is basically that Gardevoir has more HP than Curlia, so it's kind of like a soft upgrade in that sense, but still an interesting choice, you know. We also have the Wormadam to allow you to hit fighting weakness. I'm guessing that's why they went for the fighting type one. We also have the Slowbro, the Mightyena, the Raichu. Got the Breaks in here because we are playing Force Arena. I personally don't like Breaks in that much because it scales so slow. Like, you need to find all Serenas pretty quickly. But honestly, if you can get them in the discard earlier on, then Breaks and Serena is a decent combo. Going back to the Appleton and Flapple as well, and then that card in the middle is Manaphy. followed by Radiant Jirachi, which is interesting. You don't always see that because typically the opponent can just boss around it, but still interesting nonetheless. Funnily enough, in this deck, it's kind of like a classic build of Zoroark. There's like no new fancy attackers or anything. There's no new Noivern. There's no cetitan, no Luxray. It's just kind of like a classic Zoroark build plus reverse energy. So I wonder if like this person just really liked the twin energy build and then kind of like molded their deck to fit in reverse energy instead. So that could be an interesting note. But then I believe this is the last deck to look at, and this is definitely not like the most competitive Zoroark deck ever, but I thought it looked really fun, so I thought I'd include it. That is going to be focused around this Gilmora and Lucario. Also, this list is playing with barrels, so big points for that. So this Gilmora basically says when you knock it out, you get to flip a coin, and if heads, the opponent doesn't take a prize card for it, which is pretty cool. And its attack just does 6 points of poison damage. Now this deck does play Radiant Sneasler, so that could be 8 damage between turns, which is cool. Of course, the opponent could just switch out of it or evolve, but still worth bearing in mind. It's pretty decent. The deck also plays a 2/2 line of Lucario, which does 30 damage for single fighting energy, but it does 150 if any of your fighting Pokemon were KO'd last turn. So it would allow you to do 150 after doing 80 damage, theoretically, if a Gilmora just died. Kind of an okay card. A little bit sketch with this deck because you're obviously not doing a crazy amount of damage. I'd have liked to have seen like a Brilliant Stars of Lucario in here maybe, but overall a pretty fun deck. I don't think it's anything too crazy. If anyone's wondering, the stadium in the bottom right hand side, that's I think it's Barren Wilderness or something, Wilderness of Disaster. It says basic Pokemon have their retreat cost increased by 1 colorless. And this deck, it does actually play 2 boss, 1 Palpad. So you could go for like a stall strategy in the late game, but it's mainly here to help you trap big basics in the active and kill them with Gilmora. But pretty interesting deck overall. But yeah, this has been Ember Power, and I will say, oops, we're going way too far. Where are we? Thanks for watching. Yeah, there we go. A bit of an end there, a bit of a spoiler for what's coming up, I guess. But yeah, thank you for watching. It's been Ember Power. Hope you'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.